I look around, I see a lot of uncertainty. Um, yeah, I feel like there's just a lot of folks expressing a lot of certainty one way or the other, and I'm just grasping for it. I have very little.
The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or on any specific security. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. Any past performance discussed during this program is no guarantee of future results. Any indices referenced for comparison are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly. Any references to performance of securities are thought to be materially accurate and actual performance may differ. As always, please remember investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Please seek advice from a licensed professional.
And we are back with another edition of the Daily Dots, and I am joined, as always, by the brain trust himself, Mr. Chase Taylor. I can say your name. It's amazing. Second time we had to do this, a little technical difficulty. But what I was saying when we first started, not a lot of note, just an odd day. We saw the, a little flip over, equal weight, outperforming a little bit. Just very, very odd and strange to see Meg 7. Was there a single Meg 7 name green? I don't think there was.
Let's see. Apple red, Microsoft barely red, but red. Tesla red, Google red. I know Meta was red, so yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, very and
Nvidia red,
and most of them down 1% to 2%.
And Meta down over 2, Amazon down over 2.
To see the NASDAQ push green on that's bizarre.
It's sort of the opposite of yesterday. Not just like yesterday had bad breadth. So you had, the Kings really doing well. And then under the surface, I mean, there was a lot of stuff down. And today, exact opposite.
Yeah, you saw that. I was looking at a bid coming into Costco today, laughing at that. Costco was up like 1.2% on this tape, and it was down yesterday. It's hard to know if any of the, it's hard to know what of this is just, flows, ETFs, all that kind of stuff. I will continue to say though, it's really hard to find any uniformity in U.S. markets as far as prices, what's valued where, what's moving, what's not.
No point in looking for uniformity.
No. And quite honestly, it feels a little bit messy at the moment. It probably should, just because of what's going on and and how many unknowns there are out there. But yeah, it's interesting setup. Anyway, why don't you walk us through the tape and show us what happened on the day?
Yep, we just closed, so good timing. S&P up 0.42, Qs up 0.12, small caps are up 0.66. You had equal weight up 0.93 with Mag 7 down 1.08. So very solid outperformance. And then you had ex-US stocks up 0.76. So decent outperformance for non-US today. Of perhaps a significant note today, we had oil down over 2% as Trump expressed some optimism on getting an Iran deal done. A lot of other people kind of poured cold water on that after, but it seems like it's closer than it's been for a long time, at least. Gold was up 1.4, silver up 0.8, dollar down 0.2, and then naturally, because I started getting excited about 10-year yields going up yesterday, they fell about 10 basis points today, and so did the front end. So 2 and 10, both down 10 basis points today.
That's a move. What's any speculation on what that's about?
Just more cuts getting priced. Like maybe the data today, like you had retail sales not coming great. You had a big miss for home builder sentiment. That was pretty nasty. But I mean, jobless claims are still fine. Like not a huge deal. So it was kind of an interesting day. I don't know where 10 basis points comes in. Now at the same time, if oil being down here definitely squashes inflation. You maybe still people taking a harder look at those inflation numbers we got this week and deciding inflation's dead and the Fed's going to cut. A little bit of Fed commentary, but none of that seemed that that juicy. I don't know. But at the end of the day, you're where you were 2 days ago, more or less. So
It's a really weird. One of the things that's really weird about right now is, and we've seen this before, but not quite to the. Markets and the economy just feel so out of step, and that, I mean, you're not setting new all-time highs every day. I understand the wait and see approach. It's just it's a bizarre environment because you have this contingent of people. It's like, it's never been better to buy stocks. I'll just get it. It's going to go nuts. And yeah, I look around, I see a lot of uncertainty. Yeah, I feel like there's just a lot of folks expressing a lot of certainty one way or the other, and I'm just grasping for it. I have very little right now. The only thing that I feel confident in, and the only thing that looks clear and somewhat durable to me, is that I think it's a phenomenal time to sell U.S. assets and deploy that money elsewhere.
So speaking of, you still have only 4 countries beneath the U.S. year to date, and that's Turkey, Thailand, Saudi Arabia. Like you're not talking, any investment, darlings here by any stretch. But, we're up less than 1% on the S&P, and you look out in Europe, and there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 countries up over 30% year to date in Europe.
Wow.
So, yeah. And I mean, even like Chile is up 31%, just like everyone predicted.
Well, yeah. And the funny thing is, you go back and look at those markets and they're still dirt cheap. I mean, they're just ridiculously dirt cheap. And I mean, you can say that for virtually every market out there. Yeah, I continue to be marveled at the, at the disparity in prices, valuations, what's trading where. It feels increasingly chaotic and themeless to me at the moment. Like, for instance, if you're all, Katie bar the door, grab the stocks, everything's going up. I don't understand that narrative. I don't get it. If you think this is the time to be buying, 100 PE growth stocks, yeah, maybe you're right. I don't get it. I don't see that. Now, to be fair, I'm usually not the kind of guy that's going to be dipping into those kind of places anyway. But yeah, just a very, very disparate, strange environment. And like I said, I feel like you see even more kind of weird things. Like, I mean, show me. It's probably happened, but just odd movement. I mean, last time that the entire Meg 7 is red, and decently red, 1% to 2%, pretty much on the names. A few of them hanging right around even. And then NASDAQ finished positive on the day. That blows my mind. I mean, that's crazy.
I mean, it happens from time to time. I mean, just yesterday was total opposite.
Yeah.
So in a way, it was just an unwind. And one thing I forgot to mention that probably plays a role in treasuries today and in equities, because, yields down is very helpful. It sounds like the Trump administration is going to roll back some financial crisis era regulations on banks on like minimum requirements for capital, bringing those down. And then we're going to probably also have the, I can't remember what it stands for now, the SLR. Why can't I think of the name of that? You're going to have some revisions to those regulations. So basically a bunch of bank deregulation that lets them house more treasuries.
Standardized lending requirements, or?
Oh man, I cannot remember. Anyway, but point being, it makes it a little easier for banks to use their balance sheet to help you with treasuries.
What was it during COVID that the Fed suspended reserve requirements for the banks?
Yeah. So like that, basically treasuries didn't count against you at all.
Yeah.
Like you could just grab as much of that as you want. No one cared. Is a rough way of thinking of it.
But that was just an emergency measure. That wasn't permanent.
Right. So a lot of people wanted them to make it permanent, and they didn't. And that was the SLR. And they kind of pulled that back. Nothing terrible happened or anything, but there's talk about on both capital requirements outright, and then the supplementary leverage ratio. There you go. Both being dialed in a way that allows more balance sheet to be used to grab treasuries and also to lend money. But I think a lot of people are extrapolating, oh, their banks are going to lend a bunch of money now. It's like, well, that's more of a demand thing and if they think they're going to make money thing.
You know what's funny? In the age of quantitative easing and Fed doing everything it does and, buying up securities and all this kind of stuff, why do they still have reserve requirements? Is it just for keeping up airs, just keeping up the image, right? Just tradition, if you will. Maybe they're worried about the ramifications if they say they're not going to have reserve requirements, because you and I both know, and it's not even implied, right? It's explicit. The Fed's got their backs, the big banks, right? I mean, they're not going to let them go under, and they've said as much, right? So why have the reserve requirements?
So it's more capital requirements that, your balance sheet has to be at least backed up by a certain amount of capital so that leverage ratio doesn't get to the point where a small problem becomes a blow up risk, more so than, traditional reserves where you have to back deposits with a certain amount. Like, that's not a big deal anymore the way it once was. I think everyone's cool with the banking system being an enormous, on purpose Ponzi. But at the same time, like, when it comes to not backing up deposits, but more backing up, your liabilities, like that's the part where I think there is still some, okay, you can't lever up, because that was a problem in the GFC when you looked at the leverage of the banks. Like, it was just insane, the leverage we allowed them to build up on some of the stuff they were doing, which is why these regulations came in. So to see them unwound, like, to me, it makes me a little nervous, but at the same time,
well, I know, but
I think we probably went too far.
The thing that was ridiculous to me, though, is that the Fed has exemptions for securities, right? Meaning, this
a lot of this stuff's global. Like, a lot of that stuff's global too.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, if you sit there and let a bank, if you have a system that sits there and says, we're going to see AAA securities regardless of their duration, as long as they're AAA, we're going to consider that cash on the balance sheet. I mean, you're just asking people to lever up and do stupid stuff, especially a bank. You know what I mean? Like, how easy is it for the bank to do stuff like that, and to lever up and to get aggressive? That's silly regulations in my opinion.
So on that one though, like the SLR got pulled up, like they got to do what they wanted there, and then they put that kind of like back on them. On actual reserves, they never changed that. In COVID, they pulled it to zero. They never pulled that back up. So there is no requirement on reserves for backing up deposits at a certain level anymore. Just the capital requirement rules.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
What's the difference in that? So we're talking about there is no requirement for having money on reserve at the Fed, or that is what's still required?
You don't have to back up. You don't have to have a certain amount laying around for your deposit base. You have to have a certain amount of assets to back up essentially your liabilities.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you know what? Actually, that's fairly transparent and honest then. Actually, it's silly. It's crazy to say that out loud.
It depends on what liability, because to go back to the AAA, like, do you have to back up your gold or your treasuries or whatever? Like, no, but like,
no,
if you made it some, if you own some securities or you have lent money, like, okay, like, let's see what you have backing that up is kind of my understanding of the way it works. Not that I'm any sort of banking expert.
Yeah. No, that actually seems a little bit transparent. It's pretty wild to say in a fractional reserve system that you no longer have to have capital on hand to back up deposits.
I think they realize like banks, it's so dumb for a bank to just go nuts with that. Like, and there is to some degree, some natural level of, we just had a few banks go out. Like, they probably should have paid more attention to, but at the same time, one of the things that hit them there was treasuries, and what we're doing now is going to bring more treasuries on. So what you're going to do is you're going to QE through bank balance sheets with the Fed backing that up, so that the Fed doesn't have to house it all themselves. Is probably honestly, the way it's probably going to go.
I saw, speaking of which, I saw something the other day that I was dying laughing. I'm sitting there at my son's little league game, in the bleachers, And I'm talking to this dad, and all of a sudden I noticed the hat he's wearing. And he's wearing this hat that says Silicon Valley Bank Risk Management Department.
That's awesome.
I was just laughing. I was laughing my tail off. I got to see if I can pull one up. I immediately thought, you know what? I should buy one of those for Chase and I. Let's see here. I got to pull this up, see if they got it. Oh, yeah. See, SVB, Risk Management.
That's awesome.
We got to order some of those.
Oh, they got a bunch of different ones too.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to order those. That's classic. That's right up there with the make volatility.
They got the Lehman one on there too. That's nice. It's 2008.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that's like an OG hat there. OG financial crises. What else did we see? Nice pop in gold. Pretty strong bounce back there for gold today.
Yeah.
What about crypto world? Is crypto still going ballistic? Because it seemed like it took a bit of a breather today.
Yeah, it feels like it's been kind of just flagging, going not sideways, but like a very calm move lower so far is what we've seen. If I look at Bitcoin, yeah, you just been stuck in a range between like 105 and 101 here the last few days, after you absolutely surged from mid 90s to mid 105. So
now this is not going to be.
Although Coinbase got some bad news today, so they got hit, but
for what?
7%. I know they lost. So hackers had access to customer data since January apparently, and I guess I think there was a New York Times report basically saying that they may have essentially made up some user numbers. So bad combo.
Jeez. They haven't gotten a Wells notice or anything like that, have they?
It is. I don't know if it's Wells notice. Maybe, because I think the SEC is poking around, but I can't remember if I saw anything about.
And for those of you guys at home, a Wells notice is basically like a be prepared for a cavity search. It's just, what's the best way to describe what a Wells notice is? Basically, we're flipping over all the mattresses. We're looking because we think you might have done something really wrong. And I believe a Wells notice is only rolled out if there is a belief that there could be criminality. I think that's what it is. It doesn't mean you're toast, but it's not fun.
Yeah, they had one in 2023, but I don't know of one so far.
Okay.
On this thing.
Huh. I don't even know.
Sometimes though, you'll have these things where the media catches onto something, and then the SEC is like, "Oh, I guess we have to actually look at that." You know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah. I mean, they respond to flames.
But this SEC doesn't seem to want to do much on crypto, so I would not be surprised if we don't see much here.
Interesting law, and I just heard about it. I don't know if it's passed or if it's been pushed forward. Did you hear about Trump's regulation law? Making a mandate that every regulation that is passed by a regulatory environment has to basically not allowing regulatory agencies to pass laws effectively.
Oh, well, now maybe I don't know what you're talking about.
So
I thought I did it first.
A new regulation or a new rule he's putting out there, and I just heard about it on the last interview. I hadn't caught onto it yet, but something along the lines of, because what happens, right? We've talked about this before, but if you haven't brushed up against it, you just don't realize how crazy it is. But the regulatory bodies have basically unfettered ability to pass regulations that may or may not have any corresponding value or character to any existing law, right? And yet, if you violate those regulations, specifically, and virtually in every industry, but even talking about the financial industry, violating a regulation can actually get you in criminal trouble, right? Cause you to pay a fine, get suspended. All of these things, have significantly negative impacts. And so they're like, oh, it's not a law, it's a regulation. You're like, well, can I be negatively impacted financially by it? Yes. Could I potentially face criminal charges from it? Yes. And you go, okay, that's a law. That's not a regulation. That's a law, right? And so saying that you cannot pass any regulation that cannot be tied directly to some type of existing law, meaning regulations
kind of ties back to Chevron thing. Like,
Well, and regulate, that's what a regulation should be when you think about it, right? It should be a rule in an independent or in any individual sector or industry that is like basically the regulation should be the representation of an existing law in that industry. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
As opposed to when you're a regulatory body, and it's this great workaround that they've done, and not just one party or the other. Definitely more, it's happened more on the left. Probably just because they're not nearly as worried about the size of government agency power, things like that, right? Conservatives tend to be more, paranoid about size of government, things like that. But anyway, when you have these regulatory bodies that basically have this unfettered ability to pass regulations writ large, what they're doing is they're usurping the legislative power.
But I'll push back there. I would say Congress handed it to them.
Oh, no.
Congress just writes the laws so open-ended, and they're like, here, you figure out what the rules say.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No. Yeah, like it's not like the regulatory bodies crowned, knighted themselves and gave themselves that power. It's just gotten so out of hand now.
Yeah.
Where you're sitting there. I mean, I'll use there have been scenarios where we have wanted to refund people money, right? For a variety of different reasons. Refund people money off money we've made, of a commission. We do very little commission business, but we're fee based. But there's so many of these regulations you'll bump into, and you're like, so you won't let me take care of somebody, right? Well, they're like, we don't want illegal kickbacks. You're like, well, that's not what this is. You know what I mean? Like, so punish the wrongdoing, but don't have these regulations that aren't tied to any law, right? That's why I've always said, like in the financial industry, and I think every industry is a little bit different, but I've always been an advocate of, look, you need to cut the number of regulations and increase the punishments, right? Yeah. If somebody does something that they're not, you and I both know operating in this, walking through the lilies and not stepping on a landmine, everything, it's really hard. It's really hard because there's stuff that you would do that no normal, rational person would think, why would that be a problem? Right? Like communication with clients. Why would that be a problem? Right? And so you've got all these just completely useless rules, but that can get thrown at you at any given time and cost you your livelihood. Right? And even though you didn't break any laws, you didn't violate anything. And so anyway, to me, I think that's a wonderful thing, because the other pernicious part about that people don't talk about enough is it really short circuits our entire system, right? Because when regulatory bodies can effectively pass laws, we can't vote for people that run regulatory bodies. And the reason why that's a constitutional issue is that we cannot hold those, right? The whole reason the system's set up the way it is because every 2 and 6 years, all those legislators have to face their constituents in re-election. On the regulatory side, they don't. So you can't give them the power of Congress. Now, granted, you make a really good point. Congress granted them that power.
Right. And I think it makes sense in some scenarios where like hardcore expertise is needed to even know how to deal with it. Like think of drug development type stuff where it's like, okay, like we don't know, so you tell us how this should work.
Well, right. And like
but that's not going to end up with people going to jail and stuff.
Yeah, you have to give them a certain amount of leeway. Like I was saying, the way a law is looked at in each individual industry is going to be different, right? And so you've got to give that industry the ability to suit that law, right? Pass regulations that allows them to enforce that law. The problem is that's not what they were doing.
Right.
They were just making up their own rules, right? And then yet they could impose legal punishment. And you're like, oh, that's a regulation. You go, no, that's a law. If you can take money from me, if I can possibly face criminal charges, if I can have my livelihood taken away.
And not always with like a full redress in court, which you should have if you're going to do all that to me.
Right. Yeah. So I think that is a wonderful thing. And like I said, I believe that we do need to have regulation. I'm not one of those guys saying I don't think we should have an SEC. I think we need one. I just think the scope of it needs to change. And there's so much time spent running around. And it's not, the other thing too is it's not even the lawyers. It's not even the guys that work at the SEC. It's not their fault. They're just following the rules. But they spend so much time, as a guy that's had them do it to me, they spend so much time going after all of these regulations. And a lot of them are meaningless or completely meaningless. And you're sitting there going, your job, well, they're doing their job the way it's told to them, but what their job should be.
Right. The spirit of why they exist and like a first principles view of what the SEC is there for.
Yeah.
You get astray from that.
Yeah. Like for instance, I think it would be a much better service for the investing public, the markets at whole, and the country if we were probably a little bit more focused on the prevention of fraud than we are if somebody communicated with existing clients in a way that violates regulation 14C-1. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Right. Like, because, okay, you said that's a regulatory violation. What was the harm that was caused to anybody by it? Did the client lose any money? You know what I mean? You're like, I understand you're doing your job enforcing the regulation, but what's the point? Whereas if you preempted an Enron, or you preempted, some of these other frauds that have been uncovered, there's real damage there, right? There's real consequences. Right.
We're still litigating the like Ponzi stuff from decades ago.
Yeah. It's just I think that's a positive development. Are you hearing any new chatter on the trade front?
Not really. And even when the China one came out, it was kind of like, yeah, we'll probably talk here in a few weeks. And it's like 90-day pause, and like we'll talk to you again in 3-4 weeks. Like, I don't know. Like, don't love hearing that personally. It sounds like Japan, Korea, like that's not like no one's talking about that anymore. It's gone slow. It's pretty clear. They're driving pretty hard bargains. It sounds like India is willing to basically just drop all their tariffs to zero. But if you really think about it, like what is, cool, but
it's not like we're buying a bunch of stuff from India.
And yeah, well, even if we are, like, what is India going to buy from us? I mean, you look at their per capita GDP and it's virtually nothing. Are they going to buy a bunch of Chevys or something? No. Like, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of countries like that. If you looked at that, the crazy list that they came out with the numbers, and it's like all these poor countries, now we have like 60% tariffs on them or whatever. And it's like, okay, like they weren't going to buy anything anyway. So it's just weird the way that whole thing worked out. So if I'm any of these countries, if I'm like Bangladesh or India, I'm like, yeah, cool, 0% tariffs, like knock yourself out. But no one's going to buy anything from you.
Yeah. It's not.
So we'll see. I think the China climb down, now not everyone's China, and they have to recognize that they don't get to push America around the way China does, because we don't need everyone the way we need China. But at the same time, to see like, to be really firm and to be willing to use your leverage can work. So if I'm Japan, I'm just going to look at this and be like, well, we have leverage. So let's make it clear to them that we're happy to make a deal, but we're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot to get it. And I think that's kind of where they're at. So I honestly, like, my current view on trade is you're going to probably settle roughly at the 10% on everybody, like base rate, and then a little higher on China and a little higher on a couple other places maybe. But I think, and yeah, we'll probably go out of our way to protect the things we view as strategic. So to me, it's basically 10 on everything, carve out, strategic stuff for, things we deem important. And then that's about it. But at the same time, one important thing that did come out was Trump made it clear he was upset with Apple, because Apple, what they were going to do is take all of their manufacturing for the things that were going to end up in the US from China and move it to India. And Trump basically came out and said, no, like, I don't want you to move to India. I want you to move to America, which to me, in this case, makes no sense. Like, screwing in tiny screws on iPhones, for $4 an hour versus for $15, $20 an hour, like, that doesn't make sense for a reason. I don't think a lot of people want that job in America for entry level pay. And I don't think a lot of people want to pay the added cost to the iPhone. Like, so that one was interesting to me. My assumption is, though, they still move to India and it all still works out. But we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, India seems like a wonderful. It's not going to be China. It doesn't have a lot of the advantages yet. Hopefully, their economy continues to develop and all that kind of stuff. But it does seem to be an answer. I mean, if I'm Apple, that's one of my first thoughts. I mean,
Makes sense to me.
Makes tons of sense. A little bit different. We don't talk about this, or we don't think about this much, or we don't talk about it on the show much. But what is your overall tenor of the market? I look at this market right now, and I can't help but feeling, again, I nothing about my outlook really changes. I just the level of serenity seems a little bit too widespread at this point. I highly doubt we get out of this year without seeing substantially, some more serious volatility bouts. Now, how much that moves indexes, I don't know, but I do think that this is one of these moments right now where things feel a little too serene. Like, I don't think they need to, I'm not saying things should be getting hammered or anything like that, but, we were talking about the VIX yesterday. I think investors should be prepared for everything, as always, but especially in this environment. I don't think, if you're looking for just a Trump up and to the right rally, I just don't think it's going to go that way this year.
No, but it's possible. I mean,
no, anything's possible.
So I think this is important to paint both scenarios.
Yeah.
And what leads to them. That right tail scenario would be, the trade war is over. We're going to keep these 10 and 30, and then like it doesn't really go up from there. And we even bring down maybe some of the sector tariffs or whatever. Like, nothing, trade is no longer a big risk moving forward. That would obviously be good for the market. I mean, we have this deregulation stuff that's starting to hit, like we talked about earlier. That may help if you get bank lending picking up. If people feel like, oh, we have some certainty here, like CapEx and those kinds of things can pick up. And then you can get into a situation where, like, let's say they pass the tax cuts and it's unfunded and it blows out the deficit. That's wonderful for the private sector. That brings up, that nominal growth, which brings up earnings. So next thing you know, these, like, we're looking at 7.5% expected earnings. Well, you may get 10, 12, 13% earnings if you were to blow out the deficit on unfunded tax cuts. So that's kind of that right tail scenario where, like, everything goes right from here on out. And then obviously the left tail is like, you get to that 90-day window with China, and he's like, you know what? No, like, let's have the big trade war. Let's decouple, like, so you get in a situation like that, or like the reciprocal tariffs that are currently in their 90-day window that's like halfway over. Maybe like all this stuff largely comes back, and it's like, okay, we thought we were done. And then the uncertainty meter is just like, pegged all the way to the end, where it's like, okay, we thought we were okay because they delayed it all, and now they're, putting it all back on. That would be your left tail, 4,500 S&P, and then your right tail is, 7,500 because everything's great,
Well, yeah, and not only that, I don't think 7,500 S&P would be great. No, and the reason I say that is because
great for market returns, obviously.
Yeah, market returns, but I don't think you get there. I don't think you can get there in this environment, because I think whatever you did to push stocks there, I think that you'd lose the back end of the curve.
Yeah, unless you, the banks go scoop it all up with the deregulation, or the Fed gets back in there and buys it or whatever. But yeah, I agree, and I think part of yields right now is some of it is them watching the day-to-day, what's going on in Congress, and that's why I keep talking about the big beautiful bill. Is that's one of the big things right now, is like, what do they get done there? Do they get something done? How big is it? Does it blow out the deficit? Is it fairly deficit neutral? Like, it's super unclear who's going to win on this stuff, and how, and who pays the price. And
then, like you said too, I don't think you can look past the legislative process, right? Like, meaning
it's wildly up in the air.
Oh yeah. Like, everybody wants to act like because Trump says it's become fact or whatever. Like, you've still got to go through the legislative process. And I don't know if people are keeping up on current events.
And this hasn't even touched the Senate.
Yeah.
So you might finally pass something out of the House, and then the Senate's like, yeah, no, thank you. We don't like that. And then you're basically starting over.
Yeah.
And you have the moderates that want to pull back the state and local tax stuff so they can actually get those write-offs back. And you got people that are absolutely against that coming back. And then you have, obviously, you have the Freedom Caucus that's like, we need more cuts. Like, let's slash Medicaid. And then all the moderates are like, yeah, I would like to actually win an election again, so let's not slash Medicaid.
And then you have
the Senate.
Well, then you get, like you said, then you've got state governments. And if, you've got the brilliant state government we have here in Washington State, which in the face of all this, dealing with, higher costs of living and everything, they keep passing taxes and rent controls because that's the way to bring down the cost of living.
And we may end up in a situation where that's who loses in this is the states, because what's being worked on in the House now is making the states pay more for Medicaid, more for food stamps, kicking some people off of those programs, and all that would lead to, and the states went from flush to now all of a sudden being tight. Not just West Coast states, but like all over the country, there's a lot of states that are struggling. And so if you take them right at the point where they finally start struggling after being flushed since COVID, and you're like, oh, by the way, you got to pay a whole bunch more Medicaid on your end, and food stamps, SNAP, which they never had to even pay for that before. That's always been, feds took care of that, and they shared costs on Medicaid. But then it turns into like, well, you pick up more and also pick up some of the states would have to start cutting a lot of stuff, a lot of, jobs, like benefits. You could get in a situation where like it looks like things should be better because they are kind of on the federal level. You look under the surface at how states are doing, and it's like, ooh, that's not good. It's easy to forget about state budgets, doing what we do. But that's a trap I think it's important people don't fall into, depending on how this goes down.
Yeah, and if you want to see some real incompetent governance, I think looking into state budgets, especially those on the West Coast, I'm sure there is bad other places. But to see what these people did to their budgets, seemingly, I mean, if you just look at the ramp up in budgets and the way that they've tried to hold the spending there, you're looking at them going, guys, how are you going to continue on that spending pace when you're not getting envelopes full of cash from the federal government all the time? There's some of the incompetencies of the way that some of these states have been run on the budgetary side is just, it's shocking. Like here in Washington State, I don't quote me, but something like the state spending budget has increased by like 300% in the last 11 years. That is insanity. And now we went from 5 years ago having a big surplus to having a massive deficit. I think the biggest deficit we've ever had, and climbing. So it's going to be interesting to see how they tackle these issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take some
hard choices,
some very real cuts. And you think about it, some of it's just baked in. I mean, you think about demographics and how many people need to use Medicare, Medicaid, these kinds of programs. Not to mention, the education stuff. Like that's where all the money gets spent. It's just healthcare and education for the most part. And good luck to all the states.
Yep. Well, that does it for us. Anything else you want to include? All right, guys. And as always, hey, we got our webinar coming up next Thursday, May 22nd, 3:30 p.m. Just a good way to see what we do, how we do it. No obligation, no cost. So go to knowyourriskradio.com. Actually, go to bulwarkcapitalmanagement.com and sign up for that for free. Anyway, you guys have a wonderful evening. We will see you again tomorrow. You're listening to the Know Your Risk podcast. Download and subscribe at knowyourriskradio.com.
Investment advice cannot be given without a client service agreement. Zach Abraham is an investment advisor representative of Trek Financial, an SEC registered investment advisor. Bulwark Capital Management is a marketing name only and does not carry a separate registration.